Okay, so pay attention. Ryan Reynolds has once again found himself surrounded by controversy after a major report revived attention around an already explosive situation. And based on the reaction from the public, this story does not appear to be disappearing anytime soon. To understand how things reached this point, we need to look back several months and examine the situation involving Ryan Reynolds and his public relations strategy. They knew pressure was increasing because attention was already growing around his wife and the criticism surrounding her conduct during a movie promotion campaign that had turned into a complete disaster. Conversations about the workplace atmosphere were beginning to spread, and Hollywood's reputation management machine understood it needed to act quickly if it wanted to shape how audiences viewed the couple moving forward.
So, what was their response?
They created a plan. The objective was to present Ryan as so kind, emotional, and vulnerable that people would struggle to believe he could ever be controlling or involved in anything negative. They wanted audiences to view him as a gentle, nervous, approval-seeking person who would never intentionally harm anyone. If that image worked, then any accusations connected to his actions or role in the controversy would appear unbelievable because they would conflict with the personality they had carefully established. This emotional protection strategy appeared during a conversation with Tom Power. The interview was designed to promote a documentary Ryan was producing about the late Canadian comedy icon John Candy, called John Candy, I Like Me. And the decision to focus on this particular person was not random. John Candy was known as one of the most compassionate, music-friendly, and warm individuals in entertainment. He was remembered as someone who made people feel accepted, almost like a giant teddy bear whose purpose was bringing happiness to others. By connecting himself with John Candy through this project, Ryan appeared to be trying to associate himself with that same kindness. He was using the reputation of a beloved comedian to make the public view him through a more emotional and positive lens. Throughout the interview, he repeatedly created comparisons between himself and Candy. He explained that both were people who wanted to make others happy. He suggested they shared similar struggles with anxiety, constantly worrying about other people's opinions, and simply wanting everyone around them to feel good. It came across as a carefully designed moment with a very specific purpose. He wanted viewers to recognize some of John Candy's qualities in him. He wanted people to see a thoughtful, harmless person trying to survive the pressures of Hollywood. However, staged vulnerability has one major weakness. When it is authentic, it remains consistent across different moments and environments. When it is calculated, it often begins to break apart when challenged. And that is exactly what many people believe happened afterward. Once Ryan appeared to have established this emotional image, the conversation shifted dramatically. Instead of remaining focused on John Candy, he began criticizing the way modern audiences consume information, and the argument sounded almost defensive. He expressed serious concerns about what he described as the TikTok generation. At first glance, that might seem reasonable. Many people worry about short videos, reduced attention spans, and the speed at which information spreads online. But when examining his comments more closely, critics saw something different. He complained that people no longer read complete articles. He said he was concerned about independent creators who summarize complicated stories through short clips. He specifically criticized the phrase, "I read the article, so you do not have to." He described this entire trend as dangerous for society. He questioned what happened to unbiased journalism. He said he wished people had a built-in critical thinking switch before using social media. Then he encouraged audiences to rely on traditional media organizations instead of independent online voices. But here is where many people found the situation interesting. He specifically mentioned the New York Times and Time magazine as examples of reliable sources.
Consider the irony.
A person discussing the importance of unbiased reporting and established media was also being accused by critics of attempting to shape those same media narratives for personal advantage. He presented himself publicly, connected himself to the legacy of a respected comedian, and encouraged people to trust detailed reporting and careful analysis. Yet critics argue this was happening while the public image surrounding his family was already being managed, influenced, and carefully presented. The argument was not truly about objective information. It was about maintaining control over the story. It was about influencing what audiences learned and how they interpreted it. Interpreted. And the suggestion that people should trust the New York Times was the most noticeable part because, as we are going to examine, critics claim his team was allegedly involved behind the scenes at that exact time attempting to influence a major story involving that same publication. Now, let me explain how this entire situation looked from the outside, because the difference between Ryan Reynolds' public comments and what critics believe was happening privately is extremely significant when everything is placed together. Here is the issue with his message about critical thinking. Many people argue it was not truly a request for people to become smarter. Instead, it was a request for them to follow a certain direction. Ryan Reynolds was not necessarily concerned that audiences were failing to analyze the information they received. Critics believe he was concerned because people were analyzing it more carefully. Independent creators were no longer simply repeating headlines created by entertainment publicists. They were examining original documents, comparing timelines, studying available evidence, and pointing out inconsistencies in the stories being promoted by the celebrity couple. By focusing directly on the facts, these creators were avoiding the traditional Hollywood publicity system, music, and that created a serious challenge for the image being presented. To slow down that spread of information, critics argued that the public needed to move away from independent commentators and return to established media organizations that could potentially be influenced through traditional channels. That, according to critics, was the real purpose behind the message. That is why he repeatedly emphasized trusting major publications and reading complete articles. They believe he wanted to reduce attention toward voices that were questioning the official version of events. Now, let's look at an example of why people viewed this strategy as beneficial to him. The recommendation to trust Time magazine came shortly after Blake Lively appeared on the Time 100 Most Influential People list. Many critics questioned whether that recognition truly reflected influence and accomplishments or whether it was connected to strong public relations efforts and industry relationships. They argued that it was less about independent recognition and more about celebrity branding. And the reference to the New York Times created even more discussion. The public would later hear claims that his team was allegedly involved behind the scenes in helping shape a major article connected to that publication. The contradiction was difficult for many people to ignore. He was speaking directly to viewers about the importance of reading complete reports and using critical judgment, while critics argued that the media coverage involving his family had already been carefully managed and structured to discourage deeper questioning. They believed he was not looking for a completely informed audience. They believed he wanted an audience that would accept the version of events being delivered. The reason behind this strong support for traditional media became clearer to critics after the interview was released. The New York Times published an extensive article called Blake Lively's Last Chance, written by journalist Julie Jacobs, and it was presented as a serious and balanced look into the workplace dispute involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. However, many people later argued that the way the article was developed, presented, and promoted suggested an unusually close connection between entertainment industry figures and a major news organization. They claimed the purpose was not simply reporting, but an attempt to rebuild Blake Lively's damaged public reputation. Here is why they reached that conclusion. The New York Times had not always appeared supportive of Blake Lively. Earlier, in August 2024, the publication criticized the way she promoted her movie. The article suggested she treated a serious subject like a casual romantic comedy. It discussed criticism surrounding her comments encouraging audiences to attend with friends, wear floral outfits, and enjoy cocktails. It also noted that her co-star seemed to approach the movie's heavier themes with more seriousness. That was the coverage at that point. Then, according to critics, the tone appeared to change significantly. The same publication that had previously highlighted criticism surrounding the couple was later viewed by some as defending them. Many people believed they discovered a possible explanation. A reported morality clause connected to Blake Lively's business agreements involving her beverage and beauty brands. According to those claims, the contracts included terms suggesting that damaging coverage from major outlets, including the New York Times, could negatively affect her companies and potentially threaten valuable partnerships. Her business interests were reportedly at risk. The theory presented by critics was that the couple viewed the earlier coverage from the New York Times as a potential danger to those business ventures. To protect those brands, they allegedly sought to influence the narrative surrounding the situation. needed to shift and for the publication to frame the situation differently. From this perspective, traditional media became a protective barrier around a celebrity's business interests and public reputation. And perhaps the most surprising part was the belief that nobody would examine the details closely enough to notice what was taking place behind the scenes. Now, we need to discuss what many consider the most significant aspect of the entire New York Times article: the important information reporter Julie Jacobs allegedly decided not to include. This is where questions about journalistic fairness begin, because when people compare what was highlighted with what was missing, they argue the imbalance becomes difficult to overlook. Critics claim she was not simply presenting facts, but instead creating a storyline where Blake Lively appeared as the harmed party and Justin Baldoni was positioned as the person responsible. Here is the argument they made. The article strongly implied that Blake's accusations were legitimate, but that legal limitations prevented her from receiving justice. Critics say this presentation was intentional. They believe it encouraged readers to think that a flawed system had failed someone because of technical legal matters rather than the actual evidence. They argue the framing was designed to create sympathy and emotional reaction. However, according to outside workplace review documents, particularly page 108 of the final assessment, critics say the findings presented a completely different picture. The reviewer reportedly analyzed each individual complaint, examined supporting information, and determined that the evidence did not establish a hostile workplace environment. According to this interpretation, the complaints were not rejected because of procedural issues. Instead, the evidence itself did not support the allegations being made. One example involved Blake discussing conversations that included remarks about her appearance. The review reportedly examined those comments within their broader situation. According to the reviewer, the conversations occurred during the production of a mature movie involving specific script requirements. Based on that context, the reviewer concluded that the claims did not meet the standard for harassment. They were viewed as professional discussions connected to the creative process rather than inappropriate behavior. Many critics also argued that the publication had access to these findings and the detailed conclusions, but chose not to emphasize them. Instead, they claim the article described the outcome as a legal technicality, a description they believe helped preserve the public image of those involved. From their perspective, that was not neutral reporting, but an attempt to shape public perception. And the criticism continued. While the article referenced a private message from Justin Baldoni as evidence that Blake was approaching the situation sincerely, critics argue it failed to explain the circumstances surrounding how that message was obtained. According to those claims, her team created a separate company in September 2024 and used that structure during another legal dispute to obtain information before the main accusations became public. The article focused on the message itself, but critics argue it did not explain the method allegedly used to access it. They consider that missing context a major problem. However, many believe the most notable omission from the entire article involved Ryan Reynolds himself. A person reading the article without additional information could easily believe Ryan was simply a supportive spouse watching from the outside while his wife dealt with a difficult working relationship. The article, according to critics, created the impression that he had little participation in the conflict. But independent commentators have argued that the situation was much more complicated. They claim Ryan Reynolds was heavily involved privately and had significant influence over how events unfolded. According to those accusations, he offered creative opinions regarding important scenes despite not holding an official position within the movie's leadership team. They also allege that he attempted to pressure agency WME and influence efforts to separate Justin Baldoni from the production. Additionally, critics claim he played a role in shaping the promotional strategy, including major public appearances that reduced Justin Baldoni's opportunity to present his perspective. By reducing or excluding Ryan Reynolds' involvement, critics argue that the New York Times removed an important part of the story involving one of Hollywood's most powerful figures. The dispute was presented mainly as a conflict between Blake and Justin, while Ryan remained mostly outside the focus. Readers, according to critics, were not given information about alleged private conversations, claims involving industry pressure, or accusations that he helped direct the public messaging around the situation. They argue this was not simply incomplete coverage, but protection of a powerful individual. The details that could have created negative attention toward Ryan Reynolds were allegedly absent, creating a version of events that critics believe did not represent the full picture. And for those critics, the willingness of the New York Times to present the story in that way raised even more questions. York Times' decision to frame the story in this way created major concerns among critics about whether the outlet had lost its objectivity while covering this specific controversy. Now, we reach what many consider the most troubling section of the entire situation because the contradiction surrounding the push for traditional media became even more noticeable when details about the alleged PR campaign targeting independent creators became public. While Ryan Reynolds appeared on national television, smiling and encouraging viewers to think carefully, question information, and be responsible online, critics claim his team was simultaneously pursuing a strong campaign against the same independent voices. These were the people he suggested audiences should be cautious about trusting. These were the commentators he appeared to be directing people away from while promoting established media organizations. But here is what critics argue the New York Times article failed to address. They claim the celebrity couple used their influence and resources to challenge people who spoke negatively about them. According to these claims, they issued extensive legal demands to 107 independent creators, YouTubers, and online writers. Critics argue these were not ordinary information requests. They say the demands attempted to obtain private financial information from more than 100 individuals, with the stated purpose of discovering who might be supporting criticism against them. The argument from critics is that the couple struggled to accept that ordinary people could independently disagree with their actions. They believe many creators were simply reviewing available documents, analyzing events, and reaching their own conclusions. Yet, according to this perspective, powerful Hollywood figures assumed that criticism could only exist because some outside group was financially supporting it. That belief allegedly resulted in attempts to require numerous private individuals, including smaller creators working independently, to provide sensitive financial details. Many people viewed this as an intimidating message to anyone creating content online. Question the popular narrative, and you might find yourself involved in an expensive and exhausting legal process. Your personal information, financial details, and private conversations could potentially become part of a public battle. To critics, this completely challenged the carefully built image of a gentle, anxious, people-pleasing personality. They argue that someone presenting themselves as harmless and sensitive would not attempt to obtain financial records from over 100 online creators simply because those individuals criticized a promotional campaign. Instead, they believe it reflected a powerful entertainment industry system attempting to protect and control a public narrative. Some critics argue that by not highlighting these allegations, the New York Times helped support that effort. Then came the moment when many believed the friendly public image began falling apart in front of everyone. The incident happened publicly under intense attention at one of entertainment's biggest events. The date was September 4th during the Toronto International Film Festival. The occasion was supposed to be a celebration. It was the premiere of John Candy, I Like Me, the documentary Ryan Reynolds was using to highlight his connection to the beloved comedian and present himself as a thoughtful, sensitive person. One of the guests attending was Eugene Levy. At 78 years old, Levy is considered one of Canada's most respected entertainers, recognized for his calm personality, famous expressions, and memorable performances in projects like Schitt's Creek and American Pie. He is widely viewed as approachable and non-threatening. However, according to reports from critics, Ryan Reynolds appeared uncomfortable and frustrated during the event. They claimed his stress and irritation were becoming visible as pressure around his public image increased. The interaction that followed was recorded and later examined by a professional lip reader, Nicola Hickling, who provided her interpretation of the conversation. In the beginning of the footage, Ryan appears tense, with a serious expression, music, and noticeable stiffness in his body language. He approaches Levy and says, "Bull man." The phrase was delivered toward someone who had not appeared to provoke him. Levy seemed surprised by the sudden comment. Music, looking uncertain, he attempted to calm the moment and responded, "Language. You do not need to speak so harsh." It appeared as though he was reminding Ryan that they were standing at a public gathering surrounded by cameras, guests, and industry professionals. However, according to observers, The attempt to reduce tension did not have the desired result. The relaxed and humorous personality, Ryan was known for appeared absent. Ryan responded by saying, "Please do not ever tell me how I can talk to people." Levy, appearing uncomfortable, started to respond with, But Ryan interrupted before he could continue. He then spoke briefly toward another person nearby, turned back and stated, "I am done here. We are done." After that, he walked away from the interaction. The entire moment was recorded and later reviewed through professional analysis. Supporters and critics may interpret the exchange differently, but the footage created another wave of discussion around Ryan Reynolds' public image. Disagree about what the moment truly meant, but the video itself became a major subject of discussion, with many people believing it was something difficult to ignore or simply explain away. Now, while the reported interaction with an elderly comedy icon was already surprising, many believe the most revealing part happened right after Ryan Reynolds walked away from Eugene Levy. This moment, according to critics, showed more than anything else. Here is what they say happened. Ryan had just finished an uncomfortable exchange with a respected 78-year-old entertainer and walked away visibly frustrated. After moving a short distance, he seemed to notice that cameras and important guests were still watching him. Then suddenly, his entire expression changed. The frustration vanished from his face. A wide smile appeared and he politely approached another woman nearby and said, "Hey, nice to see you." He behaved as if the previous interaction had never happened. That immediate change in attitude became a major point of discussion for many viewers. Some felt the cheerful and humorous personality Ryan displayed publicly seemed less like a natural reaction and more like something he could activate whenever needed. Critics argued that he appeared capable of covering frustration with a friendly appearance, and they believe the fact that this change happened around someone as respected and harmless as Eugene Levy showed the pressure surrounding him was becoming harder to handle. In their interpretation, audiences were seeing a different side of Ryan Reynolds, not the gentle, approachable personality associated with John Candy, but someone critics accuse of attempting to control information, influence industry relationships, and protect a carefully managed image. They believed they were seeing a celebrity focused more on controlling the public conversation than simply allowing events to unfold naturally. When looking at the entire situation together, critics believe a larger pattern appears. They argue that a powerful Hollywood couple may have assumed their popularity, money, connections, and influence would allow them to guide public opinion surrounding the controversy. According to this view, they created a sophisticated strategy designed to reduce criticism and reshape the story in their favor. When Blake Lively began facing negative attention during the promotion of the movie, critics claim the public relations response became much stronger. Instead of directly addressing criticism, they believe the focus shifted toward changing the conversation. Ryan Reynolds used his platform to discuss critical thinking and encourage trust in traditional media while questioning independent online voices. Critics believe this happened because the couple already had connections with some of the same institutions they encouraged people to trust. Information was allegedly provided to the New York Times before many details became publicly discussed, and critics argue that important parts of the story were missing from coverage. They point to issues such as business structures, private communications, and Ryan Reynolds' alleged involvement as areas they believe were not fully explored. At the same time, critics argue there was another conflict happening with independent creators. They claim requests for financial information and private communications involving 107 creators appeared designed to discourage criticism and create fear among online commentators. The same internet environment Ryan warned audiences about was, according to critics, being challenged privately through legal pressure. However, the strategy did not completely work. Information today does not move only through a small number of traditional media organizations. Independent researchers examined available documents, reviewed timelines, analyzed claims, and shared information that critics believe powerful people wanted to remain unnoticed. What do you think about this entire situation? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe for more content.